Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength, my rock, and my redeemer. Amen. It's with great joy that I come to share this morning with Nancy Ladd in this great and historic congregation that has made its mark on the state of Maryland in such a short time of being in existence. I'm just a ghetto preacher from Baltimore, coming out of the projects of East Baltimore and being blessed by God to have some unique experiences then and since then. It's been my joy to work with Nancy, as she has said, in both Metro IAF and with the Next Church movement of the Presbyterian Church. At this point in life, I don't really know what I am in terms of denominational ties. I've spent time in the United Methodist Church, the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, the Baptist Church, and now Baptist Bishop, which is one of the unique creations of this generation. So I'm a Metho-Bap Unitarian Trinitarian. Amen. And it's in that spirit that I come to share today in this month of confluence of anniversaries and of events. It's the 74th anniversary of the dropping of that bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's also the 56th anniversary of the historic March on Washington. And for those who are just baby boomers, it's also the anniversary of Woodstock. And more recently in our memory, the 5th anniversary of Ferguson events. And unfortunately, now this month is marred with the tragedies in El Paso and Dayton that will live in our hearts and in our memories as we go forth. But it's been my experience that the church does its best work in times of chaos. Henri Nouwen reminds us that in years past, the church, the religious community, was captain of the ship. And he tells the story of when he was chaplain on an ocean liner. And he was up above deck in the helm with the captain, and a sudden squall came up. And the captain looked at Nouwen and said, "You'd better go below deck." And then he said to him, no, stay here. I might need you to pray. And that's the position that the religious community finds itself in America today. No longer captains of the ship, but merely chaplains on an ocean liner. Only wanted and only listened to in times of need and tragedy. Only called upon to be a pawn of those who possess what they believe to be ultimate power. And it's in that vein that I want to share today from the reading that was just given from the Acts of the Apostles of the Christian Lectionary, a book written in a time of chaos in the world. The world was on the brink of total upheaval, and people were in the midst and throes of the movements of history. And rather than really being named the Acts of the Apostles, this book should be called the Work of the Spirit, because it's the Spirit who's most prominent in this writing. As we catch up with the apostles of Jesus in this first chapter of the Acts of the Apostles, their lives have been turned upside down and inside out. They've been on a tumultuous ride over the past 40 days. They had seen he whom they had put their hope in destroyed upon a cross at Calvary. They had witnessed by the words of others his being buried in a borrowed tomb, and they had been told by a group of women that somehow he had been resurrected, and at this point in their lives, they were in total confusion. But yet he calls them to a mountain in Galilee, and he speaks to them words that ought to ring out to the religious community today and in every generation. He said, "You're going to be my witnesses." And it's not just going to be for those who are here, but You'll start here. You'll then proceed out to Judea, to Samaria, and carry this message to the uttermost ends of the world. And the record said that he was taken up from them, and as he was taken up from them, the apostles stood and looked up and were continuing to gaze into the heavens. And two angelic beings said to them, "Why do you stand here gazing up? For the same Jesus who you see being taken up will return again." And this text really isn't concluded until the 12th verse, where it says that they return to Jerusalem. And I would postulate to you that for the past 25 years, the religious community in America has been lost gazing up and lost in worship. Content to have mountaintop experiences that move them to do nothing down in the valley. Content to gather in times of worship. And all of us need those times, because it's in these moments that we really discover who God is. It's in high moments that we discover who God is. If an old man named Moses could stop by, he would tell you it wasn't until he was called to a mountaintop where he saw a bush that burned but yet was not consumed that he really discovered who God is. The apostles of Jesus would have to stop by and tell you that they really didn't understand him even in his ministry, but they got a glimpse when he called them to a Mount of Transfiguration and stood there with Moses and Elijah, and they saw him in a different light, and they began to cry out from the depths of their spirit, "Lord, it's good for us to be here. Let's just stay here. And we'll build 3 booths, one for you and one for Elijah and one for Moses, and we'll reside here on the mountain." And that's our tendency. We want to stay where it's safe. We want to stay where it's convenient. We want to stay where we find ourselves in a place of relative comfort, where we can block out the realities of what's going on in the world. But the passage said that the 2 men said to the apostles, "You can't stay here. You must go back down to Jerusalem." And that's what God is calling all of us to do in this generation, not just to mountaintop experiences where we discover who he is, but back down into the valley where we can find out what he can do. In the story of the Mount of Transfiguration, as soon as they descended from the mountain, they discovered at the foot of the mountain a man who had a boy who was possessed by demons, and the disciples were powerless to cast him out. And many times those of us who are people of faith believe that somehow we are powerless. But I just stopped by today to remind you that individually we may not be able to do very much, but when we unite together, we've got more power than we ever imagined we would have. And thus it is that as they come down from the valley and they encounter Jesus, they asked Jesus, "Why couldn't we cast him out?" And he said to them, "Because of your unbelief." And I would say to you today that the faith community in America is not doing more than it's doing right now because we lack the faith. We don't believe that God is able to keep us. We don't believe that God is able to make a way out of no way. But I come from a tradition where we discovered a long time ago that this journey isn't just ours to make by ourselves. But in times when we were backed up in a corner with no way out, we discovered that God is able to make a way out of no way. I come out of a tradition where sometimes we were hungry and sometimes we didn't have adequate clothing to wear, but in the midst of the chaos, we discover that God is able to feed you when you're hungry and to clothe you when you're naked. So the church is challenged today to move by faith back down into the valley. For down in the valley, you find people who are hurting. We don't want to deal with the hurting today, with the immigrant, whether legal or illegal, who shun it to the side. We don't want to deal with the hurting. Those who are addicted in large cities and in small towns in the Midwest. We don't want to deal with the hurting. Those who are hungry, those who are broken by the forces of life. But that's where God is calling us to be. and where he's calling us to do ministry. Not on the mountaintop, but down in the valley where they're hurting people. But not only are there hurting people in the valley, there are helpless people in the valley. For Moses coming down from the mountain is instructed by God to go back down into Egypt to tell Pharaoh to let God's people go. There are helpless people who need to be freed in today's generation. Those whose minds are consumed by hate, by racism, by all kinds of bigotry. Those who are riveted down, whose horizons are riveted down because of the lives they've been forced to lead. And God is calling us to help those and to walk with those, not to do for them, but to do with them that which they can't do by themselves. So as people of God, we're challenged to go back down to the valley to deal with the helpless. And not just the helpless, but we're also challenged to deal with those who have lost hope. For that's what the two men were challenging the apostles to do. Go back down to Jerusalem, where there are 120 others just like you, whose lives have been turned upside down and inside out, who've begun to believe that there's no use having hope in anything. And hope is not desire, but hope is expectation. And there are many in our society today who have lost all sense of hope, who expect nothing. I've looked in the eyes of 11-year-old girls who have written out their wills because they don't believe they'll live to be 12. I've looked in the eyes of young mothers who struggle day by day just to make ends meet, who leave one job at 7 in the morning and go to another by 9 and leave it to a 10-year-old to make a telephone, to answer the phone when she calls to get the other children up for school. And in the midst of that, it's not easy to have hope. But those of us whom God has blessed, those of us whom God has called into his service, are challenged not just today, but every day to meet those who dwell in the valley of hopelessness and tell them there is a reason to hope. Because brother or sister, I'll walk with you through your trials. There's a reason to hope. Because there's a better day awaiting, because we're going to work this thing out together. And from a song of our tradition, of my tradition, I lift these words: walk together, children. Don't you get weary. Walk together, children. Don't you get weary. Walk together, children. Don't you get weary. There's a great camp meeting in the promised land. May God bless you.
Walk together, children, don't you get weary. Walk together, children, for weariness is a privilege. Walk together, children, there is a great thing calling us. And so let us sing our blessing. Number 1018 in your teal hymnal, please rise in body or in spirit. Together, we will get there. Together, we will move. standing for a hot minute, folks, while I catch my breath enough to do the benediction. I invite you, as you are willing and able, to join hands, to reach out, to connect in some meaningful way to the people all around you. And so, as we go from this place to that place in the valley that beckons us, may you go ready and willing and called to be who you already are, for you are the beloved children of everything that is holy, and the power and the possibility, the goodness and mercy, the joy and the justice of the Spirit are at loose in this place and in you and in the world through the work of your own hands. So go then to be who you already are. And may you be abundantly blessed. May it be so, and amen.